For many, the Triumph TR6 was the last real TR, and it's an undeniable, charming classic today. It looks fantastic, it's wonderful to drive, and they are going up in value, which means if you want one, you need to buy carefully. So this is your buying guide to the brutal but brilliant Triumph TR6. This is an old British car, so understandably it suffers from rot, and the TR6 has a number of specific areas as well as the usual suspects. We'll start with the front wings. They tend to rot along these seams here and around where the headlights bezel in. The good news is you can buy all manner of replacement panels for these cars, used around about £400 each, or you can buy brand new from a number of specialists for around £600 to £650 plus painting, remember. So if you need two new front wings, you could be up to 15 or 1600 quid, even if you don't need anything else doing. So it's well worth looking at those. Moving along, where the sills join the floor on the TR6, another common rot spot. So you want to look down here, get under the car, feel all the way along. Check for any signs of cheap and easy MOT repair patches that could point to further rot from within, and just do the classic knock on it, make sure that's solid metal. This one's lovely. The good news is you can buy repair panels. You can buy a whole new outer sill, or you can buy a whole new floor pan if the rot is extended into that. Those floor pan repair panels are going to run you about £100 to £120 each, depending on where you're buying them from. Staying down here for a minute, the panel gaps on a TR6 aren't supposed to be perfect. This was built by British Leyland, don't forget, but they should be consistent throughout the car. They should be fairly straight and a fairly good gap. Run your finger down it, and if it feels like it's tightening up or getting wider, something is probably amiss. Like a number of TR convertibles, the TR6 is also known for bowing or sagging in the chassis if the A-pillar is rotten. So what you want to do, just open the door, make sure it doesn't sag. It should open all the way, the check straps do sometimes click, and it should open and close very easily without dropping. You should be able to just shut it without lifting it back into place. It should fit nicely, and it shouldn't feel like it's wobbling around in your hands. So check that thoroughly, because a rotten chassis on one of these cars is bad news for any restoration. So make sure you check that both doors open and close easily and smoothly, don't wobble around in your hand. You need to make sure the structure of the car is solid. Moving back on top, the door skins can rot out. This is a low car, the doors do collect a lot of road grime and so on being chucked up at them. The good news is you can buy whole new door skins for TR6s for about 250 quid, but don't forget that doesn't include painting, that is per side, and you will have to fit them. You've got to strip the door skin off of the frame and either fix it yourself by welding it and so on, or get someone else to do it. So you've got a lot of labour involved there, plus the painting. Again, if you need two new door skins, you could be well on your way to £1,000 depending on who you're paying to do the job for you. Next, we move to the back, where the rear axle mounts, and particularly there's a T-shaped piece of metal just above it, can be rotten. And if the rear axle mount is rotten, then that is bad news for any TR6, regardless of how good condition the rest of the car is. We've been advised by several specialists that if there's swelling around the bolts that kind of affix that to the chassis, that is game over, because if it's visible from the outside, as with most rust, you can see it from the outside, that means it's far worse from within. So if the seller will let you, jack the car up or put it on ramps, have a really good look around the T-shirt shaped mounting bracket in the chassis where the rear axle bolts on. And also on the test drive, try a few hard accelerations and brakes in a dead straight line. If it feels like the back end of the car is moving slightly and all the bushes and brakes appear to be in otherwise good condition, it might be rather more serious. Moving back up here, the rear wings are welded on items, but they can rot around the seams here, and it's very hard to repair them because there's multiple layers of metal here. It's quite complicated, and again, if you can't do this yourself, you're farming it out, you could be well up to £1,000 to have both the rear wings done by the time you've sourced new ones, had them fitted and had them painted. So just run your finger along here, check that the paint along here isn't cracked, it's in good condition, and again, feels solid all the way along. Very good drum as well. Next, old British car, so it's not impervious to leaks, remember. So you want to go into the boot, pop that open, and make sure that the boot itself is fine. Check under the carpets, look for any signs that water is getting in, check the boot floor, check the seams around the rear wings, look for any signs of any damp or any rust, because if they are, again, a lot of work to put right. Check the boot lid itself, because that hangs low at the back of the car, that can rot out, and while you can buy a new one, the metal alone is around 250 quid, so it's not cheap. Next up, the engine, the heart of the TR6, housed under this lovely forward hinged bonnet. It's a 2.5 litre straight six as used in the TR5, and it is a lovely unit, tuneful, torquey and powerful. There are a number of things to look out for though. First of all, crankshaft end float, which is pretty much game over for a TR6 engine. Easiest way to check it is with the engine running, dip the clutch and have a look for play in the end pulley there. If it's moving obviously and kind of more than a couple of mil as you do it, that's a bad sign. The internals of the engine could be on their way out. Next up, ignition timing. These cars are very sensitive to being set up right, particularly with modern fuels. You can't buy old school 5-star, remember, so the best you can hope for is modern super unleaded, which you should be using anyway in a classic car, but that can make these cars run a bit funny. So if it sounds like it is playing all the right notes, but not necessarily in the right order, take it to a specialist who's used to these cars, get them to set up the ignition timing and the fueling if need be, get it running sweetly. If the timing's fine, but the fueling's a bit odd, it either doesn't idle quite right, or it seems lumpy, or it's running rich, or what have you, it could just be that the old fuel pump, if you're particularly with an injected car, is again seizing or gummed up with old fuel and worn out. The good news is you can buy a reconditioned unit for about 70 quid and it's a drop-in part, and then without further ado your TR6 is running perfectly again. When you're looking in the engine bay, moving back to bodywork stuff for a minute, you want to check along the bulkhead and these two big panels on top of the front struts. You can get clutch fluid leaks and brake fluid leaks and battery leaks and so on, and any fluid, particularly on a decades old car like this, will be tucked up under stuff where you can't see it, where it's been eating parts of the car away. So have a good look under everything, shine a torch in there, make sure it's all fresh and fruity and crucially not rotten. Pausing the front for a minute, let's look at the back end. The drivetrain of TR6s is generally very durable and takes a lot of abuse. The most common thing you might find is a bit of whining from the rear diff or a bit of oil weepage. The good news is that if you're DIY inclined, you can put new seals and gaskets in the rear diff with a kit that only costs 20 or 25 quid. If you need to buy a new one, a bit more expensive, but don't assume you'll need one. Also, you want to be looking at the drive shafts. It's very common to get clonking on these cars, particularly with higher mileage cars and if they've been abused. There's a number of different ways you can get around that issue. The best advised one, although expensive, is a CV conversion with constant velocity joints from Moss, who will sell you the whole kit. You can do it yourself at home. It's far more durable and you can use and abuse it, but it is going to set you back £1,200, and that's before you pay someone else to fit it for you. As for the gearbox, again, it's pretty hearty. It's got a nice chunky manual shift, but if it is starting to jump out of gear, particularly first gear, that means it's rebuild time. A previous owner has probably used and abused it hard. It is popular to do a Mazda MX-5 gearbox conversion on these cars, a 5 or a 6-speed. It's infinitely tough and it makes these cars more usable, but it is expensive. The conversion to do it, you're going to be running potentially into thousands of pounds to do so. You could get optional overdrive on these cars. Until 1973, you got overdrive on 2nd, 3rd and 4th, and then from 73 onwards, you got overdrive on 3rd and 4th because they were geared slightly differently. So do ask the seller if the car's still on its original gearbox to their knowledge, and if the car's got overdrive and got the switch, check it while you're driving along in each gear, make sure it goes up and down, because a working overdrive is a lovely thing and again, really improves drivability. A failed gearbox lay shaft bearing will cause a nasty grumbly rattly noise in 1st, 2nd and 3rd. You can change just the bearing itself for about 100 to 120 quid. You can buy a reconditioned gearbox for £500 to £600, and while you're in there you might want to look at your clutch, which you can buy a brand new one with the pressure plate for around 60 quid. And if you are going to use this car for track days or hill climbing or so on, that might be the time to buy and install a light and flywheel as well. The TR6's suspension is fully independent with lever arm dampers, and it actually provides really nice handling by modern standards, provided it's in good health. We'd advise fitting brand new shock absorbers, particularly if you fancy some gas adjustable units, because then you can change the damping to your taste. They'll run you around about 95 to £100 each. They're DIY prospect to fit, and they really do modernise the feel of these cars, as do poly bushes. If you don't mind a firmer ride, you can buy a full polyurethane bushing kit for the suspension for about £110. Doing the whole car is a day or two's job if you're doing it on your driveway, but do it and the car will feel firmer and tighter, if a little bit harder over bumps, and the handling will feel way better. As for the brakes, they're really good. They're not ABS assisted because of the age of the car, but they pull this car up really, really nicely. Sticking and seizing calipers is a common issue, but you can buy replacement ones, and the discs and pads are just as easy to change as on any other car, so really nothing to worry about there. The other thing to do is maintenance. You need to be greasing the trunnions on these cars every 1,000 to 1,500 miles. It might sound excessive, but if you stick to that maintenance schedule, you'll have a car that constantly feels at its best. But ignore it and you'll get a car that very quickly not only feels tired, but will start making some nasty noises. In short, be good to it and it'll be good to you. The TR6's interior is actually a really nice place to be. It's a bit more upmarket than your MGB, with lovely walnut trimmings on the dashboard for these cars, and on some of the earlier ones you got walnut door cappings as well. If the lacquer is getting all flaky and starting to peel off and get damaged, you can buy a whole new dashboard panel online for about 300 quid, so not too expensive, and again, DIY proposition, and the door cappings are around about £200 each, so again, pretty reasonable. Next up, the seats. On a 50 or 60 year old car, a good chance they're going to want replacing. You can buy a whole new foam and cover kit for both seats, do it at home yourself in a couple of hours and transform your interior, but you are going to be looking at around £900 for that kit, so do bear in mind it's not cheap. You can buy brand new seats for around £1,400 to £1,500, but again, we are into big money territory here. But the most popular thing to do on TR6s is actually what's been done to this car here. Fit a pair of Mazda MX-5 seats. They go straight in with some adapter rails. You can buy it at £52 each, and then a set of second-hand MX-5 seats are £100, £150 depending on where you buy them. Mark II ones we recommend, they look even better, and in truth, if you didn't know, you wouldn't know. They don't look out of place, they hold you well, they're a lot more supportive than the Triumph ones, and you can even get ones with built-in speakers if you want to play your banging tunes like your Belinda Carlisle while you're driving. Any electrical gremlins you get in a TR6 are probably down to 40 or 50-year-old British wiring, so it's worth checking things like the earths, look for any aftermarket or old wiring from previous owners underneath the dash and so on, look at the state of the fuse box, add any inline fuses if you need to, just make sure that everything works as it should, all the gauges, the lights and so on. The other tip we give people with classics, particularly of this vintage, is the bulbs. LED bulbs, for the cost they are a must-do conversion. Put it on all your interior gauges and they're far easier to read at night. Do it on your exterior lights, your headlights, your tail lights, indicators and so on, and the cars are far more visible, particularly when you're driving on modern roads with all kinds of massive SUVs around. Also, they actually put less load on your electrical system, so that's worth considering as well, although a healthy battery is always recommended. So there's everything you need to know if you want to buy yourself a Triumph TR6, and they do come highly recommended. These are glorious sports cars. The British market is actually full of these cars, and it's increasingly popular to buy an American market car. It's worth considering though, if you do, it's going to be left-hand drive, it's going to have the lower compression, carburetted, less powerful engine in it, but if that's worthwhile trade-off enough for you, you are going to get potentially a cheaper car that's maybe rot-free, or certainly a lot less rusty than a British car. And also, it is going to be cheaper than a British car as well, so consider whether actually the trade-offs are worth it for you. As for how much to pay for a TR6, depends on what you're looking at. £16,000 to £20,000 is going to be generally what you're going to pay for a usable driver, and those left-hand drive American cars are going to be on the lower end of that spectrum. However, if you want a really tidy car that's right-hand drive, that's UK spec, that's fuel injected, you're going to be paying well north of £20,000. We've seen some up and over 30 grand for really mint concourse examples. If you want a project TR6, but do bear in mind with some of these parts prices I've just told you, a restoration can run into tens of thousands of pounds if you buy a wrong one. Projects tend to start around £6,000 to £7,000. They don't come up too often, but if you do fancy getting stuck in with a TR6 project, we recommend seek out a tatty but hopefully rot-free American import. It's probably worth it at that end of the scale to have a cheaper TR6 experience, and you will get access to a bustling parts community. Companies like TR Bits, TRGB, Moss, and even just general sellers online can do you pretty much everything for these cars. You can start with a body shell and rebuild it from the ground up if you want. That's just one of the reasons why owning these things is so hugely appealing. It's also worth knowing when you are buying about the chassis numbers. CC denotes an early American spec car. That's going to be the lower compression, generally with carbs unless it's been converted. But if you want a UK spec or certainly European spec car with fuel injection, you want a CP chassis number, which will be December 68 onwards, and that will give you a lot more power, up from 104 to 155, along with various other bits and pieces, not to mention the steering wheel, for Britain at least, on the correct side. Whichever one you choose though, the Triumph TR6 is a hugely appealing classic. It looks great, sounds wonderful, goes really well for a car of its age, and it's huge fun to drive. It's got all the parts support in the world, a huge community around it, and it's easy to see why these really are still considered the ultimate TR. Get an expert who knows these cars to set the ignition timing up for you properly, and then have a nice Mercedes drive in the back of your shop.